If you're an AQA A-Level Business student looking for a video to revise Unit 9 strategic methods, well, this video is for you. Now, this will be a part 1 of 2 videos because of how much there is in Unit 9. But this video will cover some of the most important concepts that you need to know for your exams, including one of my favourite, Economies of Scale. We'll also look at the difference between organic and external methods of growth, such as mergers and takeovers. We'll also look at other methods of growth, such as franchising and joint ventures. And then we'll finish off this session looking at innovation and the methods of intellectual property. Let's get into it. Now, the first thing that we want to do in this revision video is to really understand, well, why do businesses want to grow? Well, realistically, there's several different reasons. First of all, they want to increase their market power. They want to expand their market share. They want to strengthen their brand recognition and improve their profitability. Let's break each of these down though individually. Starting off with increasing their market power. Now, this lines up fairly nicely with our topic of Porter's 5 forces. Now, if my business increases their market power, well, this would reduce the bargaining power of buyers and also the bargaining power of suppliers. So if this is the case, if my power as a company increases, I can charge higher prices. And we know from Porter's 5 forces that the lower that any of those forces are, the more profitable the businesses can be in that specific industry. So I can get away with charging higher prices and potentially reduce the need for innovation. Because if I have less competitors in the market, then I don't need to continuously invest in differentiating my products. However, you do want to make sure that the business does not become complacent, as complacency is the biggest killer for these larger businesses. And as I said, it increases our power over our suppliers because that supplier becomes a little bit more dependent on your business. Is that if you are the market leader, you are providing the supplier with majority of their business, well, you have more negotiation power, potentially negotiation for better prices, meaning that your costs could begin to reduce. Another key reason as well is to increase your market share and your brand recognition. Now, we know what market share is by now. How much of the overall market is your business contributing in terms of your sales? Now, if you have more market share, you become more well known in the market. So more people recognize your brand. You may have stronger customer loyalty, and it just makes launching those new products very easy because you look at product development strategies, where you look at ANSOS matrix, new product, existing market, selling your new products to your existing loyal customers. Think of Apple. They have such an easy time now releasing brand new products because they know they have a loyal customer base who will always buy them. And one of the biggest reasons is around increasing your profitability. Now, the reason why your profitability tends to increase is because you gain economies of scale. Do not worry if you don't know what this means. In the next section of this revision video, we're going to go through what economies of scale is. But just trust me when I say this, typically economies of scale lowers your unit cost and it can increase your profitability. The next topic we're going to take a look at in this revision video, and probably one of my most favorite topics in the entire A-Level business spec, is economies of scale. Now, for all of you wondering what economies of scale is, it's this graph on the screen. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the X and the Y axes. The x-axis is the level of output, the y-axis is the cost per unit, also known as your unit cost. So what you can see when it comes to economies of scale is that as output is increasing, unit cost begins to reduce. But we also have a concept of diseconomies of scale, which we'll cover in a bit more detail. Now, diseconomies of scale is not when your level of output reduces and your cost per unit increases again. That is not the case. Diseconomies of scale is when your output increases too much, inefficiencies start to occur, and your cost per unit begins to increase. So keep that in mind. Now, how do we calculate the unit cost? Well, quite simply, all you do is that you take the total cost divided by the total units. A really simple calculation, a really simple formula, but will be so important in explaining these different methods of economies of scale. Now, when you are looking at including this in your analysis, try and use this sentence. As output grows, as we're producing more units, the average cost per unit typically falls. The reason why you need to include this in your analysis, your fixed costs are spread over more units. And the way that you improve this analysis is that you talk specifically about which method of economies of scale a business is getting. Now, what you'll find is that these larger businesses have greater access to economies of scale because they're producing more, their output is higher. So typically your larger businesses will gain that competitive advantage, linking back to our Porter's generic strategies of being the lowest cost producer in the market. As we said, the best way to gain the lowest cost producer is through economies of scale. And why this gives you a competitive advantage? Well, a lower unit cost can either increase your profitability or it can look at reducing your prices, so you're more competitive with your prices. And to show you guys an example of the calculation of how when we are increasing output, unit cost falls. Now we've just got some very basic data on the screen here. We're going up in 1,000 units produced. Fixed cost will always remain the same because it doesn't matter how many units you produce over the short term, fixed cost will be the same. In terms of our variable cost, let's say variable cost per unit is £5. £5 times by 1,000 units, variable cost is £5,000. When we have 4,000 units produced, 4,000 times £5 equals £20,000 variable costs. Then we want to add those two costs together, the fixed cost and the variable cost. So for 1,000 units produced, total cost £15,000. For 4,000 units produced, our total cost is £30,000. Now, when we do our unit cost, remember, total cost divided by the number of units you produce. You can see that the more units that you're producing, the lower the unit cost is, because your fixed costs that have stayed the same are now spread over more units. And the reason why economies of scale happens is because your total costs are increasing, but your total unit of output is increasing at a greater rate. That's why we have economies of scale. Now, when we look at economies of scale, there are two main categories of how a business can attain this: internal economies of scale and external. Now, when we look at internal economies of scale, this is what your business would get by growing, by increasing your output. And of course, you reduce your average cost because you're improving your efficiency. Now, there are lots of different methods. I'm going to show you all the ones now. First of all, we've got managerial economies of scale. Now, what we mean by managerial economies of scale is that, well, as the business grows larger, businesses can start to hire more specialist managers. Because when we look at smaller businesses, they don't often have specialised managers, leading to less efficient operations, because we can't afford to have these specialist managers. But when we are a larger business, we can, and how they would begin to improve efficiency. So for example, we have a marketing specialist, a finance specialist, an operational specialist, and so on. Now, how these individuals, how these managers improve efficiency? Well, they bring their expertise into the business, and that can lead to more informed decision making. They can optimize how we use our resources and of course improve our overall efficiency. They may be able to identify and resolve problems faster, and they could also implement more efficient processes. Now go back to the formula, remember why our unit costs fall. Now of course, total cost will increase. We're producing more units and we're spending more on managers, but they will be implementing higher efficiency rates for the business, so our total units of output should increase at a greater rate than our total costs. Next up, we have technical economies of scale. Now, when you think of technical economies of scale, it's like using technology within the business. So technical economies of scale is when larger businesses can invest more in advanced machinery and production to reduce their lower unit costs. Because when I'm a small startup business, I can't afford all of this new fancy tech and machinery that's costing potentially millions of pounds. I may have to go more for a labour intensive approach. But as the business is increasing, they need to produce more units, and they know that having more technology is going to do so at a more efficient rate. So what you'll find is that the level of productivity levels is vastly different. Showing you an example here. So looking at our small business, our total cost is £100,000 and our level of output is 100,000 units. But when we look at a larger business, total cost is a lot higher, but the output is also dramatically higher as well. Now, total cost of £10 million, but output of 100 million units. Well, remember, cost per unit, total cost divided by the output equals our cost per unit. So for your small business, cost per unit is £1, but for your larger business, it is now 10 pence. So the time to produce each individual unit for this larger business who uses more automation and machinery has begun to reduce. So they can now focus more on mass production to lower their unit costs. go back to that formula. Yes, total cost increase. Never in economies of scale ever say, well, your total cost reduced, because that's not true. Because to produce more units, you're having to spend more money. It's your unit cost that reduces. So total costs go up, we're producing more, we've got more machinery, we've got more equipment, but that should give us higher output rates. That should give us higher efficiency as a business, so the total units of output increase at a greater rate than our total costs. Next up, we have students' favourite version of economies of scale, which is purchasing, also known as bulk buying. Now, just as an FYI, please do not say economies of scale is when you buy in bulk. Bulk buying is an example of economies of scale. The principle of economies of scale is that as output increases, unit cost reduces. Bulk buying, purchasing, is just a method. Now, this is when you buy in bulk. You buy in larger quantities from your suppliers. Now, if you are buying in larger quantities, you've got a bit more room now for negotiation. So you're going to be asking for a lower price. So they should start to give you a discount. So instead of selling a unit for £1, they may sell each individual unit for 80p because you're buying in bulk from them. So using this example here, a smaller business has put in an order of 1,000 units, and that's going to cost them £10,000. But a larger business has put in an order and they've said, well, we're going to be putting in an order of 1,000,000 units. So we want a discount. So the supplier says, cool, no worries. You're going to have an order cost of 7.5 million. So even though the total cost has gone up, we look at the cost per unit. Well, the cost per unit for that smaller business is £10. But for that larger business, it's now £7.50. So even though the total cost has increased, the cost per unit has begun to reduce. Now, of course, depending on how big of a discount that you get or whether you get a discount at all, depends on how large your orders are and the bargaining power of suppliers, giving a shout out for Porter's 5 Forces. Now, going back to the unit cost formula, remember, total costs will go up. You're putting in a larger order, but you're doing so over a larger number of units. So the unit cost begins to fall. And finally, we've also got financial economies of scale. Now, we spoke about this a little bit earlier on in Unit 5 without you probably realising. Now, what we mean by financial economies of scale is essentially when these larger businesses try and raise finance, specifically through a bank loan, they can do so at lower interest rates. The reason why is because these banks perceive these larger businesses at a lower risk. So if they perceive the larger business at a lower risk, they would charge them a lower interest rate. So your financial economies of scale is when these larger businesses can access cheaper loans and better financial deals. Using this example here. You know, if you're a small business, the bank may say, whoa, you're a little bit more risky, you've got less financial data, so we're going to charge you an interest rate of 10%. But a larger business, well, first of all, the bank would definitely not want to miss up on an opportunity to make around 6% of £10 million. But as well, that larger business may have more financial credibility, so they're charging a lower interest rate. Now, in terms of how this reduces our unit costs, I wouldn't say it directly impacts the number of units that we can produce, but it can do indirectly. Now, total cost will increase because that's your interest charge. But the capital that you raise can go into investing into our production to produce more units, and that can help reduce our unit costs. But the second category now of our economies of scale are external methods. Now, internal methods is just you who gets the lovely benefits. But when it comes to external methods, it's everyone within that specific industry. So external economies of scale are the cost advantages that benefit all businesses in an industry as it begins to grow. So these are factors outside of our own operations, outside of our control. So when we look at external economies of scale, it's not necessarily the more units you produce, the lower your unit cost is. It's actually shifting the entire line down. So when we look at external economies of scale, we're moving that entire unit cost line down. And the reason why is because actually our external methods of economies of scale help us reduce our total costs. Now, the first method of external economies of scale we have is infrastructure development. Now, what we mean by infrastructure, well, this is just the basic physical systems and services like roads, electricity, water, internet connection, and so on. Now, the development of infrastructure helps people and businesses operate a little bit more smoothly. So when we look at development in infrastructure, we look at the development of our transport networks. There's more roads, there's more train lines in place. We can also look at the development of communication systems. So we've got quicker access to the internet. And what this would mean, this would reduce the cost for all businesses in that region. So what happens is our transportation, our overhead costs would begin to reduce, total costs reduce, and it makes the businesses operate a little bit more efficiently, which can of course reduce our unit cost. The next method as well is our supplier proximity. All this means how close are you located to your suppliers. So businesses will start to benefit from being closely located to suppliers because this can reduce their costs and improve efficiency. Because if you think about it, if the supplier doesn't have to transport the goods as far anymore, transportation expenses may reduce, delivery times may reduce. It's also easier to coordinate with your nearby suppliers, just once again to improve those response times. And if our suppliers are located closer to us, it's going to be easier for a business to implement just in time, which we know can help reduce our costs. So once again, transportation inventory costs can reduce because of just in time, for example, reducing the total cost and therefore reducing our unit cost. The next method of external economies of scale that we also have is shared research and development facilities. Now, this is when businesses benefit from access to collective research and development facilities, which can help them reduce their innovation costs and also accelerate technological advancement. So rather than myself as a business individually look at trying to invest in accessing these research and development facilities, instead I can pool resources together. Companies can work together, split the high costs associated with research and development activities, such as testing, designing, experimenting. And these shared research and facilities like, specialized labs or testing centers, these give businesses access to more sophisticated equipment and technology. By having shared research and development facilities, just helps reduce your R&D costs, which once again can help reduce the business's unit costs. And the very last method of external economies of scale that we have is labor pool economies of scale. Now, this is when businesses benefit from having access to skilled workers in a specific area. And the reason why it reduces our unit cost is that it reduces our recruitment and training costs. Because in areas with a high concentration of a particular industry, skilled professionals are more attracted to that region, making it easier for businesses to try and find and hire specialist workers in an effective way. And when you think about the term specialised labour pool, it just means people who have high experience and skills that are relevant to their industry, which just means that there's potentially less need for us to train these individuals. So there's many qualified candidates nearby, so I don't need to advertise as much because I know they're all going to be closely located to me. So some examples, you've got Silicon Valley. In America, it's like the tech haven for people. So if you want to work in the technology sector, you go and work in Silicon Valley. Or we've got Wall Street, which is the financial district of America. In the UK, we have Canary Wharf. So how does this reduce our unit cost? Well, how does it reduce the total cost? Simple. Recruitment and training costs would begin to go down. Now, if you remember at the start of this session, I showed you a graph and on there was economies of scale, constant returns, but was also a concept called diseconomies of scale. Now, what we mean by the diseconomies of scale, from what you can see here, is that the level of output grows too much that our cost per unit begins to rise again. Now, there are 4 different methods of why diseconomies of scale could happen. Control reasons, coordination reasons, communication reasons, and motivation reasons. We're going to break down each of these. But to explain why diseconomies of scale happen, remember, the business's output is still increasing. We are still growing as a company. So those total units of output are still growing. But the problem is inefficiencies start to happen. So our total costs grow at a larger rate than our total units of output are. So the first reason why diseconomies of scale happens is the lack of control. Because when you think about it, as a business would start to grow, they're starting to hire a lot more employees. Now, if the managers start to oversee too many employees, well, employees may begin not to do as much work if they aren't being supervised as much. They may be trying to slack off a little bit more. So as the business grows too large, it hires too many employees, making it harder for your managers or supervisors to effectively manage their operations. So inefficiencies start to happen, productivity levels begin to reduce, and of course this increases our costs. So the reason why our total cost is increasing at a greater rate than our total units of output is because our productivity levels begin to suffer. Keep that in mind because this is going to be a common theme throughout all of our methods of diseconomies of scale. Now, another reason that diseconomies could happen is that as the business is growing too large, we may struggle to coordinate all the different activities of the business. So what you'll see is that businesses, they start to experience these inefficiencies as they struggle to coordinate effectively across their different departments, across the marketing, operations, finance, HR. So what you may start to see happen is this silo effect, where these different departments or functions, they don't collaborate effectively anymore. So it's harder now to align all the different activities across the departments, and efficiency starts to reduce. There's more delays. So productivity begins to go down. So as we said, the reason why our total cost is increasing at a greater rate than our total units of output is because we see reduced levels of productivity. Another reason why diseconomies of scale happens is also because of communication problems. Now, as the business begins to grow, as we said, they're hiring in more people, there's more layers within the hierarchy. Well, unless we've got really effective established communication channels in place, there's a good chance communication will begin to break down. Miscommunication may happen because I'm not just communicating through 5 or 6 layers of hierarchy, I may be communicating through 20, 30, 40 layers. And not only that, your managers, they may now have to have a wider span of control. They may need to communicate to more people and have more people report to them. So what you'll find is that communication, it becomes distorted, it becomes delayed, and the business may result in slower decision making. So how does that increase our unit costs? Well, simply those delays, those errors, they negatively impact our productivity. So we're still growing as a company, but our total costs are growing at a greater rate. And finally, we have our motivational issues of diseconomies of scale. Now, this is quite simple because as the business grows, they're hiring more employees. So whereas before I was in a small startup business, I was involved in a lot of the decision making as an employee. I played a huge part. But now, if I'm one in 20,000 plus employees, I feel like I'm a tiny part in this massive organisation. I feel like I can be easily replaced. Now, if that's the case, my security and my safety needs from Maslow's hierarchy may not be met. I may not have that level of recognition. So what you'll find, lower levels of productivity, higher levels of labour turnover. Just relating this back once again to those theories of motivation. If I feel like I'm a small part in a massive organisation, I may not feel that I have the recognition. I may not feel that I have autonomy. We may go into more of a role culture where it's really bureaucratic. Now, if that's the case, well, my motivator factors aren't being satisfied from Hertzberg's two-factor theory. And of course, if I'm not being recognised, I'm not being as valued, that also diminishes my sense of accomplishment. So my esteem needs aren't being met. But also, as we said from Maslow's hierarchy, I may find that I'm just easily replaceable. So I lack job security, so my safety and security needs aren't being met. And how on earth does this increase our unit cost? Well, we know if we have poor motivation, typically this reduces productivity. So total costs are increasing at a greater rate than our total units of output. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be introducing these different concepts. Economies of scope, fairly similar to economies of scale. We've got synergy and we've also got overtrading. Starting off with what on earth is economies of scope? Now, as with economies of scale, the more units that a business produces, a high level of output, the lower the unit cost is. Now, when we look at economies of scope, instead of the number of units of one individual product made, we look at producing a wider product portfolio. So we're producing different products. So what we are saying with economies of scope is that our unit cost is reducing because we have this wider product range. So the question that you might be asking, well, how is that the case? So before economies of scale, our fixed costs are being spread over more units. But now, when we look at economies of scope, our fixed costs are spread over a wider range of products. So for example, costs like head office operations, transportation, advertisement campaigns and machinery. These can all be used to produce different products, to cover different products. So by using the same resources to support a wider range of goods, the business just becomes a little bit more cost effective. The next up we have is this key term called synergy. Now, synergy, I absolutely love this. It means 1 + 1 = 3. I know what you're thinking, he's gone mad, he's in unit 9 and he can't do his adding up anymore. But no, what we mean by 1 + 1 = 3 is that the value of those two individual units add more value when they come together than when they are separate. So the value of the combined performance of those two businesses is greater than the sum of them just operating separately. So by coming together, we're bouncing ideas off each other, we're using each other's core competencies, and we're able to offer something so valuable for people. And those synergies could either be your revenue synergies or your cost synergies. Now let me give you an example here of an airline and a hotel chain. Now by themselves, the airline company can get people from A to B. A hotel chain can obviously have people in to stay over the night. But if you bring these two businesses together, you start to offer these package holidays, these package services. So you offer more value to your customers. But an absolutely amazing example is the synergy between Disney and Pixar, which is one of the biggest reasons why Disney wanted to acquire Pixar. Now, essentially, the synergy came together from Pixar's creativity and animation technology with Disney's global brand, their marketing power, and their distribution channels. Now, at the time, Pixar were producing better quality animated films than Disney. But the fact is, Disney had the ability to turn those films into worldwide successes through merchandise, through their theme park attractions, and of course their loyal family audience. Now, Robert Iger was the CEO of Disney at this point in time when the transaction of Disney purchasing Pixar went through. He had the idea that if we could combine Pixar's animation technology with Disney's ability to tell stories, then the companies together would add so much value. And because of this, they've made amazing films together, such as the Toy Story franchise and Frozen, and so much more. And the last part of this small section that we need to go over now is to understand what this concept of overtrading is. Now, overtrading occurs when a business expands too quickly without enough resources. And typically this leads to cash flow problems and financial strain. Now, this is likely to occur if the business just is underfunded. It doesn't have enough capital to fund its operations. We may offer too much credit to our customers, or we could be operating with really small profit margins. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be introducing this concept called retrenchment. Now, what is retrenchment all about? Well, quite simply, retrenchment is when a business reduces its scale of operations to cut costs and improve their efficiency. So what a business might decide to do, they may close stores that are underperforming. They may also make some of their workforce redundant as they are unneeded anymore. They may sell any other non-current assets that the business doesn't need. It might also look at exiting a market that they were previously in because their strategies aren't successful. Or we could look at reducing our product portfolio, so discontinuing any products that aren't performing well. For example, products that are in our decline phase or that are a dog in our Boston matrix. Now, why? That's the question. Well, why would a business choose to retrench? Why would a business stop selling products? Why would a business want to make employees redundant? Now remember, the idea of retrenchment is to start cutting costs and to start improving efficiency again. Well, we've just gone over what diseconomies of scale is. The business has grown too much too quickly where inefficiencies have started to occur. So the business may look at retrenchment strategies to reduce the impact of diseconomies of scale. The business also may have really poor performance. We could look at financially our performance. Our return on capital employed is low. We may have too high of a gearing ratio, so we're at risk because we've borrowed too much money. We could also look at our market share, potentially that's declining, potentially our competitors are outcompeting us because we have loads of inefficiencies within the business. We could also look at a change in external environment, so we look at pestle factors, we look at competition. So for example, if we looked at the economic environment, there may be a recession, consumer confidence is low, our overall level of demands is low. So what a business may need to do, they may need to cut some costs because their level of demand isn't as high anymore. It could also be because of a change of ownership. Now in Unit 10, we'll be looking at managing change, and it's a great model called strategic drift. Now what you'll find is that sometimes the external environment is going this way, and thus as a business we decide to go this way. So what we need to make sure that we get back on track as a company, we need new ownership. We need new leaders in the business. And they may want to implement a new strategy. And their new strategy may say, well, let's get rid of the old one. Let's make all of these people redundant because of course they wasn't really helping the business in previous times. And just we may have increase in overall costs and of course inefficiencies within our business. However though, what is the impact of retrenchment? Can it be a good thing or can it be a bad thing? Well, it's a little bit of both. In theory, the idea why you would do retrenchment is to look at cutting costs, is to reduce those inefficiencies within a business. So if the business can improve this position, become more efficient, well hopefully they're becoming more cost effective, our unit cost could lower. So potentially we're more competitive with our prices or we are improving our profitability. So it could be a good thing. However, the problem with retrenchment strategies, and it kind of depends on, well, how have you retrenched the business? But for example, if you're making staff redundant, you know that could potentially have an issue on the motivation of your remaining staff. Because other staff members, they may fear that they may be made redundant next. And of course, our job security is now under threat. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're not motivated. And that could cause labour productivity issues. But not only that, short-term costs tend to increase. But remember, you do that because you want to have those long-term benefits. However, how retrenchment impacts businesses, it depends. Our favourite evaluative statement as a business student. It depends the scale of the retrenchment. Because if it's only a small retrenchment strategy, it shouldn't really have too many negative impacts. Or if it's a large retrenchment strategy, maybe we're looking more of strategic decision making, then that could severely impact the business in either way. There's a lot of uncertainty. It could depend on how the business has been restructured as well. So whether we've gone from just selling non-current assets, whether we've made lots of staff redundant, depends on the methods. And as we said, it depends on the strategy used to manage change. That's going to be a shout out to some of our theories and models that we'll use in Unit 10. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be around our mergers and takeovers. Now, these are methods of external growth. External growth is not using external sources of finance to grow the business. Students get this wrong all the time. External methods of growth are mergers and takeovers. And also takeovers can also be called acquisitions, mean the exact same thing. Now the question is, well, why? Why would a business want to use these external methods of growth versus organic methods of growth? So the reasons why we'd want to look at mergers and takeovers, well, first of all, it's quicker. Growing through organic methods, so just trying to set up new stores on your own, that can take a lot of time. But if we look at merging or we look at taking over another business, practically overnight our operations could literally double. So it's a lot quicker, and also that key word, synergies may be present. One business may be really good at one thing, another business could be really good at another, and when you combine those you could have that synergy, and the level of added value could help you stand out from your competitors in that market. You also gain knowledge and resources of one another. So like we said before with Disney and Pixar, Disney wanted to use the animation technology that Pixar had. And Pixar wanted to leverage the fact that Disney had, of course, their theme parks, their massive global branding. And of course, if we are growing by quite a lot, we have the potential to gain economies of scale, which we should know by now. As output increases, unit cost begins to reduce. And a really fancy word, it diversifies the business. It helps reduce the risk of failure. Now, when we looked at Ansoff's matrix strategies earlier on in Unit 8, we looked at diversification, new product, new market. Now, if I was to do that by myself, with my own resources, I may start to struggle. There's a lot of risk involved, two elements of newness. But if I'm just going to merge and take over a business that already does this would reduce my failure rate of actually looking at a diversification strategy. And the business may be selling now lots of different products, so we are spreading the risk. However, it doesn't always go well. There are a lot of problems that can arise from our external methods of growth. First of all, it's going to be expensive. Now, if you're looking to take over another business anyway in the first place, it costs a lot of money. So for example, Disney took over Pixar for around $7.6 billion. Unless you are a large company with extremely deep pockets, then it's going to cost you a lot of money. So your small startup businesses, I wouldn't really recommend this. And not only that, the integration process of merging all the cultures, merging all the systems and the operation together can take a long time. And what if the cultures don't get on very well? You know, one company coming into this may be really innovative. The other company may not really like taking risks. So merging those two cultures together may not work really well. We could also look at Handy's corporate culture model. We could look at merging a power culture with a role culture, and they may not work really well. So we may have productivity issues. We also know if the business grows too much too quickly, diseconomies of scale could happen. Another issue is that when you merge a company, you have a duplication of job roles. So what that would mean is that you need to make certain people redundant. And obviously, if redundancies happen, job security has risk, that could be negative for our motivation, shouting out to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And there may be legal barriers to overcome, like we looked at in Unit 7. We've got competition policy that we need to abide by. The reason why Sainsbury's and Asda couldn't merge together is because they would be too much of a market powerhouse. So there's certain legal barriers to overcome. Just because you can merge and take over another business doesn't mean it will always be approved. So what actually is a merger or a takeover? What's the key definitions? Starting off with a merger. Now, a merger is when two or more businesses agree to join together to form a single company. Now, what's key about this is that those single entity companies now no longer exist. The only thing that exists now is this brand new company. So Company A merging with Company B form brand new Company C. Company A and Company B do not exist anymore by themselves. And this typically has to be mutually agreed upon by both companies. So you tend to find that it's a little bit more of a friendlier process. Versus when we look at our takeovers, this is when one business purchases the majority control of another company. So Company A takes over Company B and they both now come under our new Company A. Now, if you are a private limited company, that has to be mutually agreed upon. You can't just buy a company shares if they're a private limited company without previous agreements with the current shareholders. Because remember, shares are bought and sold privately. But your public limited companies, this is where hostile takeovers could happen. Because majority of those shares are sold on the public stock exchange. So in theory, a company could acquire majority control by just purchasing their shares on the stock exchange. Just a quick one, if you need a bit of support with how to improve your exam technique, such as how you improve your chains of analysis, how you improve your application with your answers, and also how you improve your evaluation. Well, I've created a free exam technique course that goes through all of this, including the different answer structures for your 9 markers, 12 markers, 16, 20, 24, and those dreaded 25 markers. And you can access this by clicking the link in the description. Back to the video. Following up quite nicely from our mergers and takeovers, the next thing that we're going to look at in this revision session will be the different types of integration. Now, when we look at the different types of integration, this is basically who you are merging or taking over with in your supply chain. Starting off with horizontal integration. Now, horizontal integration is when a business either merges or takes over another company who is at the exact same stage as them within that supply chain. So imagine our supply chain looking like this. This is a very, very basic one. It's normally a lot more complex with lots of different layers. But just to explain this concept, we've got your producers, you've got your retailers, and you've got your customers. Well, we know a horizontal line looks like that. So when we look at horizontal integration, as we said, a retailer would merge or take over another retailer. Now, the reason why you would want to do this is because it helps reduce the number of direct competitors that you have in the market. That could increase your market power, reducing the bargaining power of buyers or suppliers. You could also share lots of useful resources and knowledge because this can help improve your offering as you offer similar products or services. The problem is though, you may have your own very two unique ways of operating within that level of the supply chain. So trying to merge or combine your resources together, this is where culture clashes could begin to happen. Next up we have is our vertical integration. Now, if horizontal integration, you're merging or taking over a business who is at the same level as you within the supply chain. Vertical integration, well, all you're doing is that you're taking control of different companies at different stages of your supply chain. Now, you could either go forwards or you could go backwards. Whenever you think of forwards, think you should be always facing your customers. So when we look at forward integration, you're going closer to your customers. But when we look at backwards integration, you're looking further back down the supply chain, so where the raw materials were made. So looking at this supply chain as we was just earlier, well, forward integration would be a farm merging or taking over with a retailer. Backwards vertical integration, well, this is when the retail shop may take over a farm. Now, the reason why you would want to look at vertical integration, especially backwards vertical, is that you want greater control of your supply chain. It can actually help improve your profit margins because you're not paying for that additional fee that is charged between producing the product, selling it to the next stage of the supply chain. So you're removing those supplier markups that can improve your profit margins. And not only that, but we could also look at increasing the barriers to entry. Because if I take over a supplier and they may produce a really unique resource, well, if I've taken over that supplier, I'm not going to let any of my competitors get their hands on it. So I could increase those barriers to entry, reducing the threat of new entrants. The big problems though of vertical integration is because you're now controlling different stages of the supply chain. You may be spreading yourself too thin. You might not now focus on those original core competencies that you have. And it might be really complex now to manage these different stages. And you are also going all in potentially on that specific market. So if there was market changes, you are now not just impacted at one stage of the supply chain, you are going to be impacted at multiple stages of that supply chain. Carrying on the theme of looking at different methods a business can grow, next one that we're going to take a look at will be joint venture. Now, a joint venture is when two or more companies collaborate to share resources, risks, and profits in a specific project or operation. Now, it doesn't have to be a new product, it can be just a different project, for example. Now, the collaboration is only temporary though, and the companies will still exist by themselves. And a great example of a joint venture was Toyota and BMW, because they worked together to develop a fuel-efficient technologies and co-created these new sports car, the Toyota GR Supra and the BMW Z4, which share the same engine and platform. The joint venture allowed both of the companies to reduce development costs whilst combining BMW's performance expertise with Toyota's reliability and their design. Now, a joint venture is good. You're sharing, you're collaborating on ideas, synergy may happen, but you also may be giving a lot of your trade secrets away to one of your direct competitors. Now, in the short term, you're working together. But in the long term, could that potentially negatively impact you? Another really popular method of growing a business, and the next topic within our revision video, is franchising. Now, within a franchise, there are two very important parties. First of all, we have the franchisor, and this is a business or organization that owns the franchise and grants the rights to the franchisees. Then we have, as we said, the franchisees, and these are individuals that buy the rights to operate a franchise. Now, a great example of a franchise business is McDonald's. Now, the franchisee, they would pay an initial franchise fee to gain access to the IP rights of the franchisor. So, for example, branding rights, the products that they sell. They would also have to pay ongoing royalties. So this could either be revenue royalties or profit royalties. They may also have to pay any marketing fees and training fees if applicable, and as well with other costs. So what the franchisee gets from all of this? Well, they get the IP rights, they get the established brand. Setting up your own fast food retail shop, you have to develop your own brand image. But using McDonald's, you already have a loyal customer base. They would also get ongoing training support from the franchise of how they should operate their businesses. They would also get access to the franchise's marketing materials. Because when we look at companies like McDonald's, they already operate national marketing campaigns and sponsor large events. They also may have pre-negotiated deals with trusted suppliers and also area contracts. So someone else can't just set up a McDonald's a few miles away. And as we said as well, a big example of a franchise is a company like McDonald's. Now, it can be quite beneficial for the franchisee because rather than them trying to set up their own business, develop their own brand, figure out what they need to do, they're already buying into a brand that is highly successful and really well known. The franchise, as we said, provides training and support so they know how to operate efficiently. And not only that, they have the well-established brand behind them. Because McDonald's, for example, is one of the biggest well-known brands in the entire world. So you already have that loyal customer following. And from the franchisor's perspective, well, it's brilliant because we're growing quite rapidly. We don't need to set up our stores by ourselves because other people are going to pay us to do that. And we have a constant flow of money coming in through those royalties. The problem is, though, is that we can lose a little bit of control. Because let's say, for example, one franchisee sets up a McDonald's store and does a really bad job of it. Well, that could now damage the reputation of all the other franchisee stores that are set up around the country. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be around innovation. Now, you may have seen this term come up quite a lot, but we're going to really define what innovation is, the pressures for innovation, and the difference between product and process innovation. Starting off with innovation. What do we actually mean by this? When we look at innovation, it's introducing new ideas, products, services, or methods. Now, a great question to ask yourself when thinking about innovation is, how has the world changed in the last 100 years? Or even the last 20 years? Or even the last 10 to 5 years? And we can also ask ourselves, well, how will the world change in the next 5 to 10 years? Now, the reason why we see so much change is because of innovation. And we have two types. We have product innovation, so the products that we use. Remember, there was once a time where people didn't have mobile phones. How on earth did they used to survive? But we also have process innovation, so the process of actually building products and services and a company's operations. Now, we've got different pressures as a company to innovate. So first of all, we could look at our external factors, our pestle factors. So looking at the political environment. So for example, new government regulations and laws require businesses to comply with new environmental standards. We could look at the economic side. So economic growth could incentivize businesses to innovate more to increase their demand. We could look at the social aspect. So an aging population drives businesses to innovate to meet new customer needs. We could look at technological advancements, but also as well competitive pressures, because increasing levels of competition, they may increase the need for a business to innovate. Now, innovation can give a business a competitive advantage through differentiation, giving a bit of a shout out once again to those Porter's generic strategies. So why businesses need to innovate? First of all, it's around competitive advantage because they can innovate through their products, product innovation, looking at differentiation. Or we could look at process innovation, operating to become the lowest cost producer because we find more efficient ways. Another shout out to Porter's generic strategies. So remember, anytime you use the term competitive advantage, bring up Porter. It could also help build our brand image. We become more efficient. We produce better quality products. It supports the business growth and it helps us meet evolving customer needs. So it's so important for a business to innovate. We can't have this mentality of, well, this is how things have always been done, because change is constantly happening. In Unit 10, you will learn so much about change. You will learn about strategic drift. And one of the reasons why we need to change is to keep up with the external environment. So as we said, we've got two different types of innovation. We've got product and we've got process innovation. First of all, what do we mean by product innovation? Well, quite simply, it's either developing new products or significantly improving our existing ones. So a business could look at innovating their products by enhancing the performance, looking at the design of the product, making it more aesthetically pleasing. We could look at improving the quality, looking at reducing the cost to produce the product. We could look at new features. We could look at the sustainability, customization. Now, when we think about product innovation, think about the mobile phone, a great company like Apple. So think before, to have to dial a number, they had to go through the effort of spinning that number dial around. But now we can literally speak into our phone and it dials a number for us. And the reason why we want to keep on with product innovation, because once again, it helps improve our competitive position. And if we are offering these products that are highly differentiated, no one else offers on the market, then potentially we can charge those premium prices because our products could be seen more as price inelastic. And if we are charging higher prices, profitability may also increase. And the reason why we need to keep up with product innovation is to keep meeting the evolving customer needs. But as we said, we've also got process innovation. Now, process innovation is the implementation of a new or significantly improved production or delivery method. Now, the development of technology has made the rate of process innovation increase by a large amount. So in terms of how we could do it, well, change the way that customers buy the products, change the way that people communicate with each other, how the product is manufactured. Some great examples that we have here, we've got e-commerce platforms. They never used to exist 50 years ago. We've got self-serving kiosks and stuff like McDonald's. We've got the ability to work from home because process innovation has improved technology within communication. We can check in from online. We don't have to go in that horrible queue anymore at the airport. Now, the reason why we want to look at process innovation is because it increases the operational efficiency, helps us lower our unit costs. It could help improve the quality of our product. It could help reduce the environmental impact that we have as a business and so much more. Now, all we need to do is have a look at the value of innovation, the good and the not so good. Well, as we said, why we would want to look at innovation is to help the business gain that competitive advantage, become more competitive, constantly meet these evolving customer needs to improve our levels of customer satisfaction. However, innovation does not guarantee the success of a business because innovation is extremely risky. It often requires a lot of investment and the chance of failure is very high. Now, a great example of a company who has failed lots and lots and lots of times with innovation is Amazon. Now, I bet most of you don't know this, but in 2014, Amazon actually released a Fire Phone. They wanted to compete with the likes of Apple and Google. But after a couple of years, they stopped producing it because it just wasn't succeeding in the market. So whether innovation is successful, it depends on a different number of factors. It depends on the demand for the innovation. It depends on what our competitors are doing. Are they investing in innovation? It depends on the employees that we have. Do they have the necessary skills? What about our amount of resources? Do we have a lot of financial resources to invest in innovation? What about our management? What about our culture? Is it open to taking risks? And does our industry require innovation? So now we've had a look at what innovation is and the value of doing so, it's now time for us to take a look at different ways a business can use in order for them to become innovative. So we've got different factors, starting off with Kaizen, a concept that you've learned in Unit 4 within our operations of lean production. Now, Kaizen is a Japanese term which translates into English as continuous improvement. So what we want to do when it comes to Kaizen is to implement small improvements over time. So rather than thinking of these big drastic changes, we want to improve small but constant. So the examples of these small improvements could be around efficiency, quality, and our processes. Now, as I said, it's about small incremental improvements because over time, this can lead to significant changes. And when I say small changes, I really mean small, because an example of one of these small improvements that was made in Toyota is that one of the employees saw that the font on the caution sign was a bit too small. So their improvement, you need to increase it to make it a bit more safe. Now, because of this, Toyota is now one of the most successful businesses in the world, and they get over 1 million new ideas every single year from their employees. So they have the ability to improve all of their processes. And for Kaizen to be successful, it must be embodied by everyone. It must be embedded into the culture. All employees must embrace it. Now, one of the reasons it was said that all employees must embrace Kaizen because the employees will know their line of work best. So in theory, they should know how to improve their line of work. And this will mean that employees take more ownership. They are empowered to take on more responsibility. Another key way to become more innovative is looking at research and development. Now, what we mean by research and development? Well, research is the creation and the generation of new ideas. And development, well, how can we turn those new ideas and into something that can be actually used? So it's a process, and it's a process of taking ideas into a usable product. So when we look at research and development, our definition, it's a business process focused on the investigation and creation of new knowledge, products or processes. So typical activities would include market research, product design and development, process improvement, experimentation, testing different products and making sure those ideas are valid. Another key way for a business to become more innovative is also looking at introducing entrepreneurship. Now you may think, well, entrepreneurship, it sounds very similar to entrepreneurship. And they are very closely related because entrepreneurship is about starting a new business, creating a brand new product. Whereas intrapreneurship is essentially we want our existing employees inside of our business to act like entrepreneurs. So these entrepreneurs in the company, well, they will perform very similar roles to entrepreneurs. They will develop new innovative ideas, new products, new projects to help the business grow. And one of the best examples I can always think of is Google and the creation of Gmail. Now, Gmail was an internal project by a bloke named Paul at Google, and this was done in the early 2000s. Now, at the time, most email services offered very limited storage, horrible interfaces, but Paul recognized the need for a better solution and started working on a Gmail as part of his 20% time policy project, which essentially Google allows their employees to spend 20% of their overall working time on their own individual projects, becoming like an intrapreneur. And the very final way that a business can use to become innovative is by looking at benchmarking. Now, Benchmarking, it's the process of comparing a business's performance, processes or products to the industry leaders to identify any areas for improvement. It shows the business is looking to continuously learn and improve. So for example, Tesco and Aldi. Tesco might benchmark Aldi's low-cost operating model and pricing strategy to stay competitive. Well, we could look at Netflix and Disney+. Well, Netflix could analyze Disney+ content strategy and use their interface to improve their engagement. We could also look at Costa Coffee and Starbucks. Costa could benchmark Starbucks for its loyalty programs, in-store design and global branding. However, the problem is with benchmarking is that your competitors aren't exactly going to come to you and say, these are all the things that we do well, here's how we do it. So actually finding that information can be quite difficult. Plus as well, what makes them have their competitive advantage could be down to their organisational culture, which could be very different to yours and very difficult for you to implement. And the final thing that we need to do in this revision session then, well, we've looked at what innovation is, we just need to look at how we protect it. And this will be through intellectual property. Now, first of all, intellectual property. These are the legal rights that protect creations of the mind, such as inventions, designs, and brand names. Now, intellectual property, it helps prevent your competitors from copying or imitating your business's competitive advantage. So it allows my business to sustain its competitive advantage within the market. Because if your competitor did try to copy something, whereas you already had it as an intellectual property, well, there could be certain legal consequences, certain fines they would have to pay. Now, we've got several different types. First of all, we've got our trademarks. Now, a trademark will protect your brand names, your logos, or your slogans, so only you can use them. So I can't just set up a company now called Apple and start selling mobile phones, because Apple have protected that. They protected their branding, so customers don't get confused with who they are buying from. And it helps protect the brand image that a business has built over time. We've also got our patents or patents, depends on how you like to pronounce it. Now, a patent would protect new inventions by giving the creator exclusive rights to make, use, or sell the invention for a certain period of time. And a great example of this is with Dyson. They put the ball in the Hoover, and I've probably upset a lot of engineers out there, but they patented the design that they are now the only Hoover manufacturer that can have Hoovers that have balls in, because the ball in the Hoover allows it to go around corners really easy, which helped them gain their competitive advantage in the market. And finally, we have copyright. Now, copyright is done on literacy work, so on stuff like music, books, films, software, so you can't copy it without the permission first. Now, as soon as you write something that is unique, you have automatic copyright protection on there. So if someone else wants to use your music, potentially in a video, you have to get authorization from the owner. Now, if you want to carry on your revision for your A-Level business exams, I highly recommend you check out our part 2 on Unit 9, which you can find here. As in part 2, we're going to go through some important concepts that you need to know for your exams, including what globalization is and what emerging markets are. We'll also look at the difference between offshoring and reshoring. We'll also take a look at our different multinational companies and so much more. I really do hope, guys, these videos have been helping you with your revision. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.